All right, so welcome everyone. Good to see you all and happy holidays as we're just a week away from Christmas and 2 weeks from the New Year's and all the other holidays of the season. I'm Sean and I'll be kind of emceeing tonight. And I'll just take a few minutes to kind of frame up our conversation. So I'm Sean and I'm joined tonight with Shanti and Claudia, who are part of the core team at MetaIntegral, and many of you are familiar with from the prior calls. This is our third of four, conversations around impact and kind of what are the key questions that we feel are really important to be having to kind of dive into key issues around social impact. This call is focused on using integral data to measure what matters. And so kind of one of the key questions that we're holding in that space is how can we tell more powerful stories about the impact we're having? And so we're going to be exploring, first, second, and third person data, or what we call integral data, and also getting into the kind of important and complex issue around qualitative versus quantitative, and what does this look like in the different capitals, and what are the metrics involved, and how is this different or similar to other approaches out there that are trying to bring a more integrative or holistic view to metrics and measurement and so forth. We decided to launch this series a number of months ago as a way of kind of kicking off a series of events that we have lined up, including a course that's starting in February. So that's right around the corner. And then we've also have a 5-day seminar in Australia in October. And so, we're kind of building momentum and energy around those events and kind of using this webinar to kind of, engage some of the key questions that are going to be, explored in more detail in those contexts. And also, there's been a lot of great things happening with MetaIntegral and the MetaImpact framework in the last couple months. And I'm working with Claudia and Shanti to put together kind of an end of the year retrospective where I'm going to kind of map out some of these items, a few of which, you might have heard of in prior calls or in some of the emails, but a number of which are kind of hot off the press, including an emerging engagement with Kevin Jones, one of the key founders of SOCAP, who's been working with our card deck and is inspired by the 10 capital model and is wanting to use that as part of kind of the mapping architecture for a new venture he's doing in May with a group of colleagues and other organizations. And it's called Transform Climate, Capital, and Communities. And so we'll be sharing more about that, in our newsletter updates and so forth. So be on the lookout for that in the next, week plus, because that'll give you a lot of inspiring examples of partnerships that we're engaged in different ways the MetaImpact framework's being used. So the format of the call is, I'm going to ask Shanti to just frame up a couple key questions, kind of themes, to help kind of set the stage for the conversation. And then we're just going to turn it over to whatever emerges in the conversation with all of you, with, the three of us, Claudia, Shanti, and myself, kind of jumping in and adding examples and engaging and maybe illustrating different points. But basically, we'll just kind of go where, the interest and conversation takes us. And you can also use the chat function if there's something you're wanting to post. And I'll read that out and we can include that in the conversation. And, since, we have a smaller group tonight, which is great, I'd love to just, hear, 30 seconds from each of you who's on the call and maybe say a little bit about, kind of your experience of working with, qualitative, quantitative, or your interest in first, second, third person, or, anything kind of related to tonight's kind of topic around, measurement and measuring what matters, just so we can get your voices in the conversation early on and also start to seed kind of the different areas that we might explore together. So we'll do that. And then once that's done, Shanti, if you'll jump in and frame up a few key topics, that would be great. So Mary, do you want to kick us off here with, saying just a little bit about what inspires you about tonight's conversation?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Well, actually, Sean, when we were in Iceland, I mentioned to you that I've been working with a group here that is initiating an attempt to restore land to the Hinana'e, also known as the Arapaho people here in Boulder County. And we've had amazing responses from both Boulder Valley School District and the city and the county. And it looks like that is going to become a reality. And we're having an organizational, I guess you'd call it a retreat in January. And what I'd like to do, because we've so much interest is around this, and it's the correct thing for this moment in history, especially, that I would like to present the model as a way of us organizing, because everything is expanded so quickly, and so it's become an issue for the founding four about how to organize now. So that's really what's up for me currently around this. So thanks.
Yeah. Oh, exciting. And one of the things that I think connects in too is the whole area of indigenous methods and methodologies and metrics, and how working with indigenous communities really invites us to kind of step outside of the typical quantitative focus, and also including a lot of the approaches, both quantitative and qualitative, that they themselves have developed in their tradition, right? And so there's some great books that have been written on indigenous methodologies and how to incorporate that. And it's also a topic that came up recently in the conversation with Kevin Jones that Claudia and I have started to have with him, and because a lot of the work he's doing includes those voices and those communities and stakeholders. So great. We'll keep us posted, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. Eric, would you mind going next?
Sure.
Great.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think one of the things that really attracts me to what you're doing at MetaIntegral is having that big picture perspective on all the things that one might want to include, and how when we get focused on a particular set of factors, we start overlooking things. So that kind of zooming process of coming in, that we can measure something like financial capital, for instance, is typically measured, and a country looks at, how are we doing in our stock market and what's our gross national product and things like that. But by, getting narrow, then we omit things. So to have that framework where we zoom back out and say, well, what else do we want to include? What are the other capitals that are important? And I know, as for instance, a measure of well-being like gross national happiness, for instance. I invited someone on the call today who's has some connections in Bhutan, and it's like, oh, how do we look at some different factors like that and expand our possibilities? So that's really what I'm curious about, is that kind of moving back and forth between the specifics and the broader view. So, yeah, that's
great.
Leave it at that.
Yeah, perfect. When I think that skill that, as integralists, we're often wanting to cultivate, of kind of zooming into the micro and then zooming out to the macro, and being able to kind of, move between those frames is so important, and really engender a kind of thinking that, really required for doing the kind of solution creation that we're committed to. And I love that you mentioned Bhutan and gross national happiness, because you doing that reminds me that actually the first academic article that I ever wrote and got published in an academic journal was in the Journal of Bhutan Studies when I was living in Bhutan after I had finished my master's and I was working on my PhD. And what I was doing in that article was I was proposing how they could measure gross national happiness. Because when I was living there, there was this excitement about this concept, but it wasn't operationalized. And so I thought, well, integral theory can help us with this. So I wrote this article basically talking about how you can use first, second, and third person methodologies to measure gross national happiness. And then in the years after that was published, I don't think because of the writing of the article so much, rather than just the conversation kept maturing and developing, that they started hosting annual events, bringing scholars from all over the world, and really tackling this issue of how do you measure gross national happiness. And so now there's a whole kind of expanded engagement around that. but I do enjoy the fact that, you know, that article was kind of one of the first on the scene, kind of looking at that issue. And the fact that tonight we're talking about first, second, third person ways of measuring what matters. You know, it's just perfect that there's kind of full circle here, Eric. So thank you for creating that synchronicity. Great. And how do you say your name? Is it Dorota? You're going to have to coach me here.
Sorry, it's Dorota, but you can call me anything you like.
Okay.
Music.
Yeah, great. Welcome, Dorota. Do you want to share a little bit what brings you here today?
Yeah, I'm working in China, and I've been asked to the Center for Gross National Happiness in China.
Oh my gosh.
So the King of Bhutan has just invited me there in
Wow.
last week, and I'm working with a couple of interesting people here. So yeah, talk about spot on, and I teach spiral dynamics around holistic center. And I just yesterday was invited to join the new China Eco Village Network, and they want to kind of bring it all together: ecology, gross national happiness, spiral dynamics. So I'm here to learn what I can. Spot on.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, welcome. Well, just because I love Bhutan, and this is just a good reason to say a little bit more. The King of Bhutan, when I was there, it's not the current king, which is his son, I believe. But 9/11 occurred when I was in Bhutan. And I just arrived into Bhutan. I was only there a few weeks, and I was still living in a hotel waiting for my assignment to a house out in the countryside. And after 9/11, the King of Bhutan brought all the Americans in the country to the main monastery there in the capital city. And they did a 24-hour Buddhist prayer purification ceremony where they had all the monks basically chanting nonstop for 24 hours, and taking turns and lighting all these butter lamps. And it was just such, obviously 9/11 was so shocking and devastating. But to be there then and to be held by the king and his three wives and the monks and just the beauty of the land, like it was very touching to feel the love and support. So Bhutan has a very special place in my heart. I lived there for 6 months. And the fact that you mentioned, eco cities and villages, Marilyn Hamilton, who was on one of the earlier calls and who's listening to the call through video, she and I are working on bringing the MetaImpact framework to Findhorn and using it to measure the impact that Findhorn is having through its various activities. So she submitted a proposal in the last month along those lines. So we're waiting to kind of hear back on that. But and then also I just heard today from another friend and partner in Montreal that a proposal that he submitted to them that was heavily informed by the MetaImpact framework has been accepted by the city of Montreal to evaluate the impact of a learning journey that they're sponsoring for 10 innovative companies over the next year. So as you can see, there's a lot of points of contact with stuff that's emerging and some of the activities that all of you who are on the call are bringing forward. So that's exciting. So welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm meeting Marilyn on the 30th of December because I actually live in Findhorn, so I'm just dividing my time.
Well, there you go.
Wow. Touch on that, and we've been in touch kind of every day recently about bits and pieces. Oh, Marilyn, and so we have this meeting on December.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's a magical world. That's so cool.
You said it.
Yeah. Jerry, what's that?
How does this work? Do I have to mute myself when some people are speaking, or what?
Yeah, I can mute and unmute you, so I can go ahead and mute you.
Okay.
There you go. Great. Jerry, you want to say a few things and join us here? There, I just unmuted you, or no, maybe you're calling in. Is that? I'm not able to unmute you, so I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself, Jerry. All right, let's move on and we'll come back to you. Phil, are you able to? There we go.
Sure, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
I guess I'm involved in, or I guess my focus is on different types of community assessments where we're working with community dialogues or interviews. to gather different perspectives and helping individuals and organizations see how their work is fitting into a broader system. And then how we report on that oftentimes is it's either trying to rely on patterns or different kinds of frameworks that help connect some of the different thoughts or interests or issues that are arising from those. And so I'm just seeing a lot of value in MetaIntegral as a way to touch on some of the different dimensions of what we see being relevant in a way that's, it seems like it can be much more accessible to people. But I'm just excited to see different models or different case studies where that's done and experiment with how we can use that in our case.
Great. I love, Phil, that this phrase you use, that it feels like it could be much more accessible to people. And that's a big part of what drives me in the context of this work, because I feel on the one hand, you know, measurement, reporting, quantitative, qualitative, like all of that's so scary. It's just like, oh my God, like, what are you talking about? You know, and yet like, it's so much more easy, accessible. It's like, you know, there's a way of breaking it down and inviting people into it so that they can actually track the data that they're kind of informally tracking anyway, support them to just include that. And so a big kind of part of what I want to do and that we're working on MetaIntegral is democratizing integrative reporting, right? And making it more accessible, making it easier. You don't have to have a PhD in research to be able to do this. And when I was teaching at JFK, I had the 6-month, you know, 2-semester course on integral research where people would pick a topic, and it would be what I would call a soul topic, like something that was deeply meaningful to them. Because I would often say, if it's not a soul topic, then at some point you're going to get discouraged, and then you're going to want to just walk away from it. So you have to pick something that, you know, is so deeply meaningful that even when you're like pulling your hair out, it's going to keep pulling you back to the engagement. And so I would have them then identify 6 methodologies, 2 first person, 2 second person, and 2 third person methodologies that they would use over a 6-month period to research it. And what I kept finding over and over again was these were individuals, they were graduate students, but they had no training in research, no background in methodology, quantitative, qualitative, any of that in most cases. And yet they would produce these amazing research projects using 6 different methods, and they would provide a report, you know, a final presentation of the multidimensionality of this, you know, soul topic that were just exquisite. And it just over and over again just reminded me, like, people can do this. Like, you know, just your average graduate student can do this. Like, anyone can do this. And like, it helped kind of break down the sense that you needed to have certain specialized training and statistics or this or that in order to track data, collect it, organize it in a way that makes sense, documents it, makes it visible, and allows you to tell a powerful story about the impact of, you know, whatever it is that you're, you know, concerned about. So I really love this point that you've made of like making it much more accessible to people, because that's really a big part of what we want to do. So great. Thanks for joining us tonight. And Jerry, I see that you posted a comment in the chat box, so that's great. So I'll read that and here. So it says, Jerry wrote, current common indicators include gross domestic product for our current dominant monocapitalist paradigm and genuine progress indicator for some triple bottom line paradigms. Something that interests me, is it possible to locate each of the GDP and GPI within the meta capital approach? So yeah. The quick answer is yes. The longer answer is take our course in February, which you are. I signed up, so that's great, where we're going to go into that. And this is a topic that Marilyn and I have talked about and came up in one of the earlier calls, because she's looking at the standards in the context of eco-cities. And it's the same kind of thing with GPD, is that most of them are focused on the lower right, focused on the systems, and most of them are third person objective. And, you know, and so you can approach, in most cases, you need all 10 capitals to make progress in all the indicators in the GPI, right? So to really measure those, I would argue you need at least a first, second, third person approach. But more importantly, I think in most cases, you need all 10 capitals or many of the capitals. And then there's usually a few indicators there that are more about culture or psychological well-being that you can include. And then, those kind of help expand the conversation. And Shanti has a big background in this as well, given his, history of, working in sustainability and eco-villages and the Reporting 3.0 work. And so we'll probably hear from him later. So more to be said on that. So the quick answer is yes, and I'm glad that you're bringing that to the conversation. All right, so it looks like there's one more person here, unless that's someone's phone who's already on the line in another form. This is the 310. So I've unmuted you. Are you there? Oh, you just muted yourself. Okay, I unmuted you again. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I think it's me.
Yes.
It's Runa. Yes.
Oh, Runa.
I'm driving in the car, so I want to be quick. And I'm not working on any specific project at this moment where I can apply this. But as you know, I'm just coming to the course, taking the course next year because I want to get the bigger picture of this. What I will do with it, I don't know, but I'm sure there is a reason for why I'm here, because I keep on being drawn and I'm learning. And it's so interesting you're talking about national growth well-being and talking about Iceland, because I remember being in Iceland years ago where I said at a 2-day conference about how we could replace the way we measure growth. And actually you're talking about that we don't need growth, we need well-being.
Yeah.
And so it's all coming up again in the conversation, both here and also in what I'm reading and just seeing around me.
Wonderful. Well, great to have you with us again. So I think that's everyone. So welcome again, happy holidays. And let me turn it over to Shanti to just kind of frame up a few topics and then we'll dive in.
Excellent. Well, lots of juicy stuff there out on the table already. And so just to follow up on something that Runa just kind of like alluded to, that, she's not working on any project. So the MetaImpact framework and the concept of distinguishing impact and 3 different types of perspectives and integral data is something that can be used in any context if you're looking to thrive and be clear what you're thriving about. So people have used the MetaImpact framework just applied to their own life. But the key thing is there, and for this discussion, is measuring what matters. And so becoming clear about what it is that matters to the context you're focused on, whether that's your life, your project, your organization, society, the world. And as has already been alluded to, there's so many different types of systems. The MetaImpact framework and this approach can help clarify and create a thriving approach no matter which of those you're looking to apply. So really, it all comes back to what are you hoping to stimulate, produce, what kind of impacts you're trying to have, and how will you be able to tell if you're having them or not? How will you be able to inspire people towards those? And how will you be able to tell the powerful stories you want to tell about the impact? And so part of that is as John has already stated, the world, for many years was kind of dominated with a, objective, scientific, third-person metric approach. And clearly that doesn't matter. That doesn't measure a lot of things that really matter. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, anything above, the base safety level you know, that's not objective metrics for the most part. Those are first person and second person measurements to tell if people are happy, if they're thriving. So how do we tell those powerful stories? How do we move from focus just on the objective to embracing all and including that in designing thriving systems using integral data? And so hopefully that kind of helps us become excited about continuing to discuss this. And Sean, maybe you want to phrase an overarching question or see if anybody has a different direction we want to take it in.
Yeah, now let me just build on that a little bit and then see what people think. So this point that Shanti's making around, you know, objectivity and the limits of it, one of the things that's powerful with the MetaImpact framework that I haven't seen highlighted so much in other approaches is we really have shifted from an emphasis on objectivity to an emphasis on visibility, right? Where objectivity is just one strategy of visibility. There's a first person strategy, there's a second person strategy, and there's third person strategies for visibility. So this is a big move, and I think it's exciting because visibility carries with it kind of the core quality of objectivity in the sense that it's something we can see, right? We can see it in some sense. So it satisfies that itch that we have, that we've kind of inherited from our hyper-modernist culture, that like we can't believe it until we see it, right? So it turns out that we can see things that aren't necessarily objective, right? But so by shifting from objective to visibility, it enables something very powerful to happen in the MetaImpact framework, right? So and let me just give some examples of what some of those strategies are. So the first person strategies are around how do you make experience visible, right? Second person strategies are how do you make relationships and meaning visible? And with third person, which is kind of more where this usually happens, how do you make behaviors and systems visible, right? So there's a lot of ways to make any of those three realities visible. You can do it, you know, in terms of first person through, you know, poetry, through art, through movement, through self-report. We do it every day in texting through emojis, right? That makes interiors visible. It makes emotions visible, right? We can do it through music, through body language, through colors, through facial expressions, through photos, video, right? You know, with second person strategies, it tends to be more like transcripts of conversations or symbol systems, rituals, stories, like impact stories, testimonials, verbal feedback, you know, all the reputation currencies like badges, you know, and things like that, or, you know, 5-star reviews, you know, so that makes relationships visible. So like on Amazon, when we see, you know, this bookseller has X number of 4.5 stars, then we have a sense of the relationship that they're providing those customers, right? And then we can read the testimonials, and then that gives us some of the first and second person data. It makes it visible, and then we make a decision around whether we want to go with that provider or a different seller, right? Again, photos, video, audio. And then the third person strategies are the ones that we're most, you know, think of in terms of metrics. That's statistics, pattern languages, mind maps, reports, numbers, graphics, diagrams, right? So the point is simply that there's a lot of strategies of visibility, and we can use them for first, second, and third person. And by doing that, it allows us to shift the focus from this hyper reductive focus on objectivity, where we just take objectivity and we set it aside and we say, that's a great approach, but that only covers part of reality. So we're not throwing out objectivity. It's important, and it might be even the most important in some contexts with some funders and so forth. But then it allows us to bring to the table the other two approaches, the first and second person, and bring strategies of visibility so that people can see those realities. And when we can see those realities, that's the subject to object move that drives transformation, allows us individually and collectively to operate on those realities, right? Talk about them, make sense of them, get feedback that then alters our emotions and thoughts, changes our mindsets, changes our behavior, changes our relationship, changes our systems. All of that change, the change in the 4 impacts, right? Transforming hearts and minds, transforming behavior, transforming relationships, and transforming systems. All of that transformation is driven largely by making the realities in all 10 capitals visible in first, second, and third person dimensions. And by making it visible, then it naturally, inherently creates transformation, because then you get the feedback loops, these multidimensional feedback loops, where then we just move towards change in the face of that feedback, right? All right, so that's a mouthful. We've said a lot. So what does any or all of this inspire in you? Challenges, questions, anything that comes up, and just kind of hearing some of these initial points that Shanti and then I made. And you can either raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. Mary. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah. So, well, this is just so intriguing to me, because as one of the aspects of this restoration right relationship initiative that we're engaging with, so for example, Boulder has no more Columbus Day. It's called Indigenous Peoples Day. Right. So as a part of Indigenous Peoples Day and the weekend prior, we brought members of the Southern and Northern Hinana Arapaho people to Boulder and hosted an event at the high school, which was so wildly successful, was way beyond what everyone anticipated. And what I'm hearing you say, so for example, there were bandanas that were created specifically for the event. So when I hear you say badges, I think of that. We had a videographer there who videotaped the event. There were news stories. And one of the things I've been saying to everybody is, this is historic. It's important for us to document all of this. And what I'm hearing, I'm excited about, because I see this, and why I want to bring this to the retreat is as a way of mapping all of this so we can document this very well. Because I feel, aside from Eureka, California, and they are also in the process of restoring some historic land to the Wyatt people, I think we're on the cusp here of doing something that could be used as a model for other places and people. So thank you for articulating it, because that's always my my bugaboo. I feel it all in my body because I'm so kinesthetic. Right. Sometimes I can't articulate it. So why I'm taking the course.
Yeah. No, it's a great example, and changing the name from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, that's a strategy of visibility. That's a second person strategy of visibility. And it has impact, and it creates feedback loops. People have different conversations, even if they're complaining about the change, or they're wondering why it happened, or what does it really mean, right? Like, those conversations are transformative. They create feedback loops. It changes attitudes. It changes behaviors, right? And so, and like you were saying, then you can really track all the other strategies of visibility, the stories that are being told, the bandanas, the symbol systems that are emerging in that participatory collective space, right? And you can collect that, you can track that, and then you can tell a powerful story of impact, right, around that event, and the the engagement that's emerged connected to it, and so forth. Bhutan, you want to measure happiness, right? What are the strategies of visibility? Like, you can count how many kids are getting a certain kind of education, and how many women are able to, sell their, food in the market, and what is the economic access that they have. And right. So those are important indicators of happiness. Like, there's a reason why we've come up with understanding the analysis around the relationships between women and microloans and income and access. And right. So, but that's third person, right? First person would be asking people, are you happy? Like, or what are the core emotions you experience? Like, what does your day-to-day life look like? What are the joys and sorrows? And like, are you having a meaningful life, right? So you have to talk to people generally to find out their first person experience of happiness. And then you can have a certain kind of interview protocol, a certain types of questions you ask and agree upon in order to kind of capture that data in a way that's formal or useful, and then you can code it and look for themes and all of that, right? And then second person strategies are like, is there community coherence? Like, you know, is there domestic violence? Is like, how does the community deal with foreigners? How are they dealing with the influence of Indian TV coming into their homes now, right? You know, so, you know, what's the disruption of community values, and is there a way that the community has meaning making in place, right? And so talking with community leaders and just looking at different dynamics and, you know, and participatory possibilities, right? You know, because a lot of the second person strategies involve collective engagement and participatory dynamics, right? So there's visibilities of strategies that you could use for, you know, happiness in all three of those domains, just to give another example. Other comments, questions, examples, challenges? Yeah, Dorota. There, I just unmuted you.
Okay, so I think there's nothing as powerful as the before and after picture.
Yeah.
You know, when you see, for example, in the eco-villages that are in that band across the Sahara, it's called the Sahel. In the last 3 years, the Redis projects there have kind of brought together the eco-villages, and they're showing photographs of what was desert now being restored to being jungle, you know, which is a really powerful picture. And then, you know, in these places, they don't have so much access to funding or other resources, but using a mobile phone, people can start tracking little short videos of what things look like today, and then tomorrow, and then months afterwards. And we can make very short little videos, 3 to 4 minutes, that are really powerful, and then just send them across mobile phones, across, you know, WhatsApp and all the rest of it. So very small, simple things now with the use of cell phones suddenly become, you know, global media artifacts. So that's been very useful in the things that I've witnessed. Yeah, something very simple but very powerful.
Yeah, and that's important to highlight that a lot of the techniques and methods out there can be very simple, very powerful, don't cost a lot of money, don't require a lot of training, and yet can really have an impact, really help carry the message through. And I love this point you're making about the before and after, because, you know, video is something that I include in all three strategies. Video can be used as a first person, second person, or third person strategy, because video can capture, you know, emotions, you know, people engaging with each other. Can also, you know, highlight like the difference between the icebergs, you know, 40 years ago and the icebergs now, right? You know, so like it captures first, second, and third person data all on video, even though video in a sense is kind of we think of it as a third person medium, but it has those other layers. You can also do before and after with like testimonials. So like before a workshop, you can ask people what are their fears, hopes, excitements, or what do they want to get out of this? And then you can pair it with, you know, what did they get out of it, right? So that can be like a first person before and after. You need to do similar thing with second person before and after. So you can actually use that concept of before and after and engage it through a number of different mediums to very similar effect, right? And so, and it's partly why we often think of testimonials kind of after the fact, but they're even more powerful if you think to capture the before testimonial, right? We tend to just think of the after one. So that's great. Is there more on that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's more on that. Music's really, like, you know, in Bhutan they sing the happy songs. That happy song really gone viral, and then all the music and video that's come along with that. I think if you accompany video with the right music, it makes it like 100 times more powerful. People really engage with the emotions, and there's also the dance that comes with it. I mean, so many examples. I think we should have another call after this.
Yeah, no, totally. That's great. Thank you.
Sean,
Mary.
I wanted to respond to what you just said because I think it's so important, and it relates to something that I recently read, and it relates a little bit to Gerard's comment there on the climate situation, that we're actually not aware of how bad it is right now because we have not been looking at the photos or listening to some of the audio recordings. There's a man, for example, who does birds, and he's been recording birds for decades, and you know, the depletion of bird song and birds. And of course, you know, the entomologists just came out with a really frightening report on the loss of insects, who are, you know, one of the keystone species on the planet. So I think that what you're pointing to there, and what Dorota is also pointing to, is extremely important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, and referencing the comment that Jerry left in the chat, I won't read it all because it's there for all of us to read, but I'll just make a couple comments that, Jerry, I think you sent us an email recently, in the last day or so, that touches in on this. So that'll give me a chance to respond in a fuller way. I think, how could a meta-impact informed climate emergency plan be presented to the Club of Rome and so forth? We have some colleagues, one woman who, was at the Iceland seminar, who has connections there. And so we're hoping to create some engagement and inroads and bring some of these ideas into that space. Claudia, I was wondering if you might share with us either now or maybe after the next person shares about kind of your experience of Alethea Springs and some of the kind of strategies of visibility that they've used with the different capitals in that context. So I don't know if you're ready to go now or if you want me to invite someone else to speak. We'll give you a moment to
Yeah, no, I can speak to this at this moment, and this is also that was my introduction to Sean's work. While I was working with an emerging intentional community, land-based community in Sonoma in California, we had all these questions like, how do we really measure the impact with the thousands of volunteer hours towards really our stakeholders? And the work with the MetaImpact framework was not only a guiding, not only helped us guiding where to go, but really, I think most important, brought peace of mind to all of us, so that indeed all the things that we are working on, making them visible, gives you just something that makes you really happy. And I will never forget this first end of the year report that we were really so exhausted after the first year. And we was like, oh my God, we didn't achieve anything. And then we worked with Sean and then we mapped it all out. And it was such a uplifting win to see what we really did. And it's not that all of these domains or capitals or values, whatever you want to name them, are important at the same time, but really that they are there and they may be growing, and some of them are maybe more emerging than others. And that was just, and has been, and this is now the 4th year that this community is working with the framework, such a powerful tool. And then I think after such a long time, you're really beginning to see also the transformation really in behavior, in communication, in the way how people are relating to each other. And I think the bit of problem that we're still facing is like, how does it really map onto the systems? Because we're all stuck in the current economic structure where the financial model is still the driving part, at least to most of the outside communication. And I think that's really the part that we're trying with MetaIntegral, with the term of wisdom economy, to really bring also another way to really how to really engage in the financial capital and how to break that open. But so that's a long path that we all still have in front of us. So that's kind of my little sharing, and I find it really interesting. So that this term of happiness, well-being. We mentioned communities. Some of you on the call are engaged in community, are engaged in alternative ways how we can be with each other, and that's, I think, where the framework has been helping a lot to make that all visible and change.
Let me just build on that, because one of the things that was so inspired me with Alethea Springs and the work that Claudia was doing there with our colleagues, Marie and Sean and others, is, they came to us and they had this feeling of like, we're nonprofit, we need to raise money, we don't have enough money, we're freaking out. Like, we feel like we have a lot of value in the property and the people who are coming and the programs, but like, at the end of the day, it's really about the money. We don't have it and we're trying to get it. And we have these loans and like total kind of typical scarcity, nonprofit, meltdown. And so we started working with the framework and their situation and started kind of mapping out the capital that they had in all 10 capitals, right? So what was the value that they had? So they had tons of ecological wisdom and understanding and natural beauty. So they had tons of natural capital in first, second, and third person. You know, they had all this rich cultural capital with Hispanic communities that had family that had been coming to the Springs for a long time, and they were putting up signs in Spanish, and people who were working there were learning to be bilingual. And so there was a real rich kind of cultural piece there, and a lot of old history going back, 20, 40, 50, 60, 100 years to the area. So tons of cultural capital, first, second, third person. They had a lot of psychological capital because both of them are trained in a number of therapeutic systems and traditions, and have graduate level training in some of that, and they bring a number of healing modalities and psychological resilience, and they offer programs, and they create a very safe container for people who work there, and all of this. So tons of first, second, third person capital. And I could go on across all 10 capital. So it's like, oh my God, like the fact that you're struggling with money is like not even the issue. Like the fact is like, oh my God, you are like rich. You are so rich. You have so much value. You have so much going on. And that allowed them to change the story they were telling about themselves. I mean, there still was the stress. There were still the loans. There's still those realities. Like those don't just evaporate. But they were able to situate that in a larger context of meaning making that inspired them, inspired their donors. And then donors could, when they donate, they can choose kind of which capitals they want those funds to go towards, right? So what kind of value do they want that financial capital to support? Do they want it to support the psychological healing work that's happening there? Do they want it to support the ecological restoration of the land there, right? Or the environmental education programs that are offered to the schools that come, right? And so forth and so on. So it really changed how they saw themselves, and also the final report that they started writing, right? It became this amazing multidimensional story of their journey with all of this abundance. So it's such an inspiring engagement. And it really helped me see the power of the framework. Like when I kind of went through that process with you, Claudia, and them, like it really like kind of got me in the heart, where I was just like, oh, wow, like if this is possible here, like this is something that needs to spread. Like we need to like help this dynamic expand and more people benefit from it. And all right, so we have 10 minutes left. Great. So Eric, let's have you share a bit. I want to keep a couple minutes for Claudia to just wrap up with some reminders. And I have a little slide share that I want to do real quick. So Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that last example, not only with an organization, but I'm just taking it as an insight to self too. Just, what are my capitals? How do I really evaluate that? Because sometimes I can get into a certain mentality of scarcity around, financial capital, but say, wow, I've got a lot of other ones and things that I can contribute. So just a personal side there, but I'm curious, in terms of taking this forward, and I had conversations with Dorota before this, and I know, some of the situations she works in, and, just looking at how inroads are created, openings, receptive moments where something can land. So, for example, working with the Chinese construction companies, and they're interested in building sustainably, and it seems like there's a real opening there. And I just want to name that, and I don't know if there's time to go there now, but just as a tag at least for what I'm aware of, that she's doing over there. It seems like a major opportunity. And one of the questions that are always in the back of my mind, I brought that up the last webinar, was to, not be so excited about something that it becomes impositional, like, oh, this is a great model, you need to do that, but to really be sensitive to the needs of those people and how to, draw out the different visibilities so they become, like, oh, I want to learn more about that it's really using skillful means in the way something is presented to people when we see there's a potential there. So that's just,
no, that's great. And it actually is a bit of a segue into the piece I wanted to share. The MetaImpact framework is meta in the best sense, along the lines of what you're pointing to. And that is, like, we're not pitching any particular methods or metrics. We don't even necessarily care if you use first, second, or third person, right? It's more about, like, we'll meet you where you're at. show us how you're tracking things, show us what you're measuring or what you're not measuring, what you want to measure, right? So we really meet the client or the community, where they're at with whatever form of reporting or tracking or metrics they use. And then from there, we situate that in the framework so that they kind of can see maybe where some of the holes or gaps are and see where their interest is, like where might they want to go, right? Because it's not realistic that every client or even most clients are going to do all 3 types of data for second, third person in all 10 capitals. So the beauty of that is at the get-go, we know we're not going to achieve that, right? At least not anytime soon, right? So it's impossible to kind of cover those 30 domains of data, right? So it's impossible, right? Financially, time-wise, for a lot of reasons. But what it does is it situates the playing field and says, look, there's more reality than what you're currently including. And what we find in almost all the cases is that when we show the client the map and kind of help them see where they are in the map, and we start having a conversation with them about what are the formal methods you're using and what are the informal methods you're using, what we find is they're actually having impact in more of the capitals and in more of the first, second, third person domains than they realize. Right. So first we kind of see what's the story they're telling themselves about where they're having impact or trying to have impact. We get clear on that. And then we use the framework to look at where they're actually having impact, where they don't even realize they're having impact. Right. And so that then fills out a much bigger part of kind of the mandala, if you will. And then from there, we just look at, where do you want to go next? Like, do you want to go from doing second person informally and psychological capital, and do you want to then formalize that? And one way that looks is like companies doing coaching. They make coaching available to their employees, or with certain kinds of performance reviews, coaching becomes available, right? And in those coaching programs, the people have goals and outcomes they're working on, but none of that's getting included in an appropriate way, right? Not talking about violating privacy, but just talking about tracking and making visible some of the appropriate aspects of that work, and then including that in a report, right? It's saying, look, we have 30% of our employees engage in a 3 to 6 month coaching program in this last year, and of those people, 85% self-reported that they had an increase in their motivation and orientation and sense of well-being. And the coaches, 90% reported behavioral pattern changes that were beneficial to the individual and the company, right? So you can easily get those kind of statistics, right? So now you have the numbers, right? We like that. So that's kind of some third person stuff, but they're really a strategy of visibility for second and first person realities. Right. So that's often an informal thing that's happening that's just not formally being included in a simple way that then allows them to tell a more powerful story about the impact they're having by making coaching, personal, professional coaching, leadership coaching available to their employees, in these situations. So let me just do a quick screen share to kind of emphasize this point from a slightly different angle, and then I'll turn it over to you, Shanti, or rather Claudia. So here's an example of how we could go in with a client and figure out the solid colors are the formal types of reporting that they're doing and the capitals and impact that they're working on, right? And you can see it's all third person, right? So we have spiritual, health, manufactured, and financial. And then in the striped areas, these are the informal areas where they're having impact, but they're not really including it. So then we have a conversation around, do you want to turn any of those striped areas into a solid color, or do you want to go into any of the white areas, either formally or informally, and include some of that, right? So that just gives you a quick way of how you can start to use the framework to do kind of a gap analysis, kind of an assessment of where they're at, But again, the point that you're highlighting is we really got to meet them where they're at. Right? Because it can be too overwhelming for them to think, right, they got to do 10 capitals. Not only that, but there's 3 kinds of data, right? Not only that, there's 4 bottom line, like the model can be too overwhelming. So often people will have the model kind of, in the back, and they'll just bring forward the parts of it that make the most sense for the client conversation at that moment. All right, so let me just, before I turn it over to you, Claudia, I realize I just want to check in to see if there's any other quick comments or reflections from anyone before we do a wrap. All right, so it looks like we're good. So Claudia, if you can land the plane.
Yeah, well, this is so exciting. I mean, this hour goes always by way too quick. And well, we have one more of these webinar sessions in front of us. That's on January 24th. And we hope to see most of you again. And those who are listening to these recordings, hello and welcome. And I also want to use the moment here before we are closing our session here to really, how can I learn more? I mean, this has really been like a question that has been coming up over the last week since we started our webinar. And so, well, if you don't know what you want to gift yourself for the new year, why don't register for our master online course? So it's a 10 weeks online course. We're starting at the end of February, and we have already quite a good group of people together. We still have a couple of seats available. So if you want to know more, please go and visit our website or just drop an email and we can relay more information to you. I also want to mention that we are opened our registration for a 5 days in-person seminar in Australia. This will be the end of October 2019. And this is a follow-up of the series that we started in spring this year in Iceland, looking deeper. And in this case, we're following the theme of health and elderly care. So it's not only for people who are working in this field. There will be the possibility to bring your own projects and engage in this really global, important question of health and elder care. And so with this, we're concluding our third session here, and we hope to see you all again in about almost a month. And then we are going to look into triple bottom line and really how can we evolve this into what we really need in this 21st century. So exciting conversations ahead of us, and goodbye. And Sean has one little thing.
Yeah, I told Shanti I was going to do this, and then I totally forgot. I was going to share with you the fact that we have our card deck. And one of the great things they do is they have, for all the capitals, they have the first, second, and third person, right? So there's a first person card, second person card, so forth for each capital. So it's a great way, to kind of dive into the details, because, an hour-long conversation doesn't kind of allow us to go through each of the capitals. The course will be focused on that. But yeah, there's the card deck out there as well, if that would be a supportive tool for you.
So the card decks, there's a link on our webpage, and we have, as of today, we have a little technical difficulties with the link, but we hope to solve this in the next 12 to 24 hours. But so they are available on our webpage, the Wisdom Economy card deck. Yeah, and I think now we are ready to wrap up, and wishing everybody happy holidays, and see you all in the next year.
Great. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight.
Blessings.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.